with our third panel of the day, which is titled Digital Medias and Representation. And the chair of the panel is Dr. Nikolai Atae, and I will leave it to Nikolai.
Good. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our third panel for the day titled Digital Medias and Representation. I'm really excited for this chat, and I look forward to the conversations we'd have after. Is Zainab still presenting with us?
Well, she's still not on the call. We can start with our two presentations.
Okay, great. Good. So I guess we will jump right into it. I'll just introduce our panelists quickly, and then we start. So again, the title of the panel is Digital Medias and Representation. And we have three panelists today: Annie Harrisson from Concordia University, Rachel Windsor from the University of Toronto, and Zainab Faruqi from the University of Toronto. Annie is a PhD candidate in communication studies at Concordia University with a background in illustration and graphic design. Her work focuses on the gamer imaginary and power relations in gaming communities. The paper is titled The Woman in the Pack, Addressing Male Toxicity Through Play in Let's Play Videos of SniperWolf. Rachel is a second-year PhD student in the Department of English at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on narrativizations of girlhood trauma in contemporary American literature, as well as girls' use of literary methods to recover from and resist traumatic events and situations. Rachel's paper is titled Blood and Vomit, Girlhood Trauma Cultures, Riot Grrrl, and Tumblr Poetry. I will also introduce Zainab's paper, so she'll join in after. Zainab is a doctoral candidate at the Women and Gender Studies Institute and Diaspora Transnational Studies. Her research interests include cyberfeminism, transnational feminisms, and diasporic studies. Her current doctoral work compares the usage of Twitter by Islamophobic right-wing extremists in India, Canada, and the US, focusing on anti-Muslim rhetoric in Hindu nationalist and white nationalist discourse. Zainab's paper is titled Hindu Nationalism, News Channels, and Post-Truth Twitter, a case study of love jihad. So, let's sit back and hear these papers, and I really look forward to the discussions. So you can take it away, Annie. Okay, you're still muted.
Yeah, I want to share some screen. So okay, I think it's fine. Thank you so much. So thank you to the University of Toronto and everyone who organized like the super nice conference. I'm really happy to present. So okay, can you see my slides? Can you nod, those who have their camera on? Yeah. Thank you so much, Rachel. I see you. Thank you, Nikolai. Okay, so my presentation today is The Woman in the Pack, addressing male toxicity through play and the Let's Play video of SniperWolf. So thank you. This is a presentation that is part of a chapter on the influence on YouTubers on gamer communities. So let's start. SniperWolf is one of the most subscribed women gamers on YouTube and has won the 2019 Kids' Choice Award and Favorite Gamer against big names like Ninja, Markiplier, and Jacksepticeye. Playing mainly first-person shooters, she goes against the stereotype of girls as unskilled or casual players. Being a woman that walks in male-dominated territory, she regularly witnesses the deep misogyny present in sections of gaming culture. Unsurprisingly, academic literature has dedicated an impressive amount of pages describing and attempting to understand the ingrained misogyny in gaming culture. For example, a 2017 study by Vermeulen, Van Bouwel, and Van Looy observes that there are still conservative segments of gaming culture that tries to push women out of gaming. Mia Consalvo and Sherry Todd, in 2 separate studies, note that this misogyny leads to heavy sexual harassment and the reassertion of patriarchal privileges. The general assumption is that women are unskilled with technology and thus also unskilled as gamers. They should instead take on support roles such as healers that are constructed as being more fitting to both their assumed inclinations and skill levels. SniperWolf is a proficient gamer and has a very thick skin. She does not only refuse this stereotype and the assigned cultural position that comes with it, but also fights back. She navigates the toxicity she undergoes with a playful and transgressive attitude, both as a means to reivindicate competency and to chastise those who attempt to kick women out of gaming. Obviously, someone with 20 million subscribers like SniperWolf has the power to change at least something. But does she? How empowering is it really for women and other marginalized groups? How much of what she does helps make gaming communities more inclusive and less toxic? My answer to this question is unfortunately not as much as it looks. So I will go over videos for 2 different series, one on Overwatch in which she does competitive play, and one on Minecraft, which she plays more casually, to show how they reaffirm cultural hierarchies already present within the gaming culture. Then I will discuss the implication of our creative input for women in the gaming culture. So the good. Our series Overwatch unveils the rampant toxicity in the community. Being known as YouTuber, she's often the target of concerted attacks and hurtful comments from male players. Those comments are not very different from what you would expect from toxic gaming cultures in general. They judge every character choices she makes, often asking her to switch to another or saying they can't trust her when she plays such and such characters. They question our understanding of the gameplay and her competency, repeatedly calling her a try-hard. They also try to push her into more acceptable roles for women in gaming, notably support and healing. One player tells her, and trigger warning, it's getting nasty at this point, I don't know why she can't just be like any other bitch in this game and play heals. I really don't. So that's the kind of comment she gets, and it's not even the worst of it. So even when she gets recognition for her skills, they downplay her achievements. As if this wasn't already enough, some player will throw the game or ask their teammate to throw the game, which means stopping the game or not putting any effort into it. Because of course, having a girl in the team supposedly gives them no chance to win. In the video Overwatch, Most Toxic Player, she lets male players denigrate her skills while she remains mostly silent. She proves them wrong by being proficient, earning skills and rewards. She frames the video as a denunciation of toxicity, and doing so, it becomes a troubling and effective statement. What would come out of her Overwatch video is that being funny, skilled, and witty is not a male monopoly, and she proves every aspect of the woman player stereotype wrong. She doesn't play casual or easy games and has an interest in more difficult and darker games. Through her videos, she claims the right for girls to play whatever they want. On the opposite spectrum, SniperWolf has a short but interesting series on Minecraft in which she plays with digital necks. In this series, she plays in a more casual manner, which allows her to focus on commentary. It is interesting to note that Minecraft has a sort of an in-between reputation in the community. It oscillates between being a real game, hard, competitive, violent with adult teams, and a child's game, which are easy and non-violent. In this Let's Play, SniperWolf seems to belong in the first category and does a sarcastic commentary of the game. The way she plays is very uninvolved. She does not even focus on her action or try to understand the gameplay. She jokes about how the game is destructive as she breaks flowers and how brutal killing cows can be. Compared to the arena fights she usually does, killing a cow looks pretty tame. She also cheers non-exploits, like going through a door and make sexist joke in the games, like she twerks for diamonds and stuff like that. Since the game lacks oriented challenge, she doesn't seem to really know what to do with it, and it and makes fun of it for being easy and non-violent. During her commentary, she implicitly places Minecraft fairly low within a hierarchy of games assumed not for children that are based on skills and competition. SniperWolf's narration style is sarcastic and funny. Oh, sorry, it breaks. I think I'll pick that back from my paper. I'm in presentation mode. Okay, I'll try to do it. SniperWolf's title narration is sarcastic and funny as she calls out minor instances of violence in video games while ignoring more important violent content. What she does in our YouTube channel is a type of metaplay, a catch me if you can type of play, where she does denunciation of the marginalized position of girl in gaming culture, transgressing boundaries imposed on women by certain gaming communities. But transgressive behaviors do not automatically translate into questioning norms. In her videos of Overwatch and Minecraft, SniperWolf creates a self-portrayal as a hardcore gamer displaying her skills in competitive gaming in denigrating what she deems to be more accessible games. Despite the fact that she's a victim of the toxicity that occurs in highly competitive games, she still perpetuates the very idea that creates toxicity she undergoes. Because she does not question or contest any of the underlying values that create obstacle to the presence of women in games, such as the evaluation of individuals based on their skills or the hierarchies between healing and other game mechanics such as combat, none of the barriers for entry that women face in gaming cultures effectively fall down. You either act like a man and face continued toxicity anyway, or go play elsewhere. She participates in what Holger Poach calls hegemonic transgressivity, a type of transgressivity that maintains status quo and existing power relation between, instead of breaking them down. Under the guise of playfulness, she reconfirms existing values and cultural hierarchies by emphasizing the need for having a thick skin, valorizing difficulty and competition in games, while devaluating other types of play such as co-op and free play. SniperWolf's Let's Play have an empowering value for the gamer girl, giving her a voice and a rebellious aura that is values within the gaming community, but the flip side of this bargain might be the perpetuation of the very ideal that caused gaming culture, toxicity, and lack of diversity in the first place. So although we need more visible female voices in gaming culture, we also need to be attentive on how the message you deliver can sometimes shut down access to other women. So, thank you very much for being there again.
Great. So we could now move on to Rachel.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm just going to jump right in. So a central tenet of Riot Grrrl, a 1990s do-it-yourself punk subculture created by girls, is the upholding of girlhood, community, and collectivity. While girls connected in a variety of ways, most pertinent for this presentation is the form of the zine, or a handmade pamphlet self-published through small-scale reproduction and circulation. Zines are a key example of this DIY network of girlhood collectivity, allowing girls to become their own cultural producers by circulating information outside of traditional hegemonic spaces. Close reading Riot Grrrl zines makes evident that the movement is at its core what Anne Spetkovich terms a trauma culture, or an example of those, quote, public cultures that form in and around trauma, end quote. Approaching Riot Grrrl as a public culture girded by the gendered trauma shared by its participants affords us the opportunity to place the movement not as a one-off collective, but rather as within a genealogy of girlhood trauma cultures that also includes contemporary girlhood subcultures, including, for our purposes, individual pages on the website tumblr.com. In this presentation, I will focus specifically on the Tumblr community, Tumblr poetry community rather, a subset of the multimedia microblogging website made up primarily of adolescent girls posting their own creative writing. Tumblr poetry blogs, like Riot Grrrl zines, rely on the principles of the DIY ethic, including strong ideological impetus for the artistic object's creation and rejection of commercial modes of production, to testify to various forms of gendered trauma. So both Riot Grrrl zines and the Tumblr poetry community, in other words, are networks within which participants can communicate their own lived experience, including those negative affects of trauma which they may feel uncomfortable expressing elsewhere. They can, in other words, use DIY collectivities to create and sustain trauma cultures. As I will explore presently, both mediums rely on similar methods with which to represent their own traumas, namely their shared sense of hurt and anger. My purpose in this presentation is twofold. I wish to suggest firstly that trauma cultures are a useful way of reading together various girlhood collectivities that might at first glance come across as discordantly ahistorical. And secondly, that an adherence to the principles of the DIY ethic is one way in which girls are able to resist a culture that insists upon their repeated traumatization. In introducing her concept of trauma as not only world-shattering events, but also, quote, moments of everyday emotional distress, Svetkovich notes that, quote, trauma discourse has allowed me to ask about the connection between girls like me feeling bad and world historical events, end quote. Svetkovich here acknowledges that girlhood bad feelings are a form of affective experience which gets marginalized within canonical trauma discourse and trauma studies. My definition of trauma relies on Svetkovich's feeling bad in response to everyday experiences and microaggressions that occur under cultural structures of sexism and misogyny, occurrences that both Riot Grrrl zines and Tumblr poetry blogs uniformly take as a point of focus. So we might begin by looking more closely at the much remarked upon anger embedded in Riot Grrrl zines and its accordant presence within the community. In the second edition of the zine Bikini Kill, the author outlines the constant threats of rape and murder that plague girls before switching to a second-person rhetorical address, writing, quote, facts? Facts? You want facts? You want it in writing? Facts aren't as real as watching your best friend cry, end quote. The author utilizes second person in two distinct but nevertheless effective ways here. The first two uses of you indicates an imagined male figure demanding the truth of the trauma, while the possessive your functions dually to indicate both the author and the reader, rhetorically collapsing them into one addressee. To further illustrate the bond of trauma, the primary injured individual in the poem is not the second person author/reader, but their best friend. This move suggests that girls are linked not only by their own experiences of trauma, but also by their own experiences of witnessing trauma. The trauma is, in other words, pervasive and inescapable. Even if you yourself are not experiencing the pain, you are never fully objective nor free of its reach. Affectively, this moment is one of both anger and sadness. The 4 question marks after the second facts makes clear that the author is dumbstruck against the imagined man's demands. Indeed, the repeated questions allows the author to figuratively turn the demand for explanation back upon the man. What right do you have, she challenges him, to ask for this from us? The astonished anger becomes a way for the author of the piece to both cope with the insensitive demand for intimate knowledge of the girlhood trauma and to react in a way that might not be possible for her in her everyday life. In the final sentence of the excerpt, the author is able to keep up a level of anger while at the same time making reference to the helplessness of watching her friend cry. While the author mobilizes anger to cope with trauma, she nevertheless also allows the trauma to exist as it is, something that neither she nor her friend are able to fix, but rather must necessarily feel. The zine becomes a space for girls to express their emotions in a medium where it is not only safe for them to do so, but encouraged, and where they can rely on each other as a support network to validate their responses. Though the space is virtual, the Tumblr poetry community also offers girls the opportunity to express their negative affects in response to traumas both individual and collective. In a similar rhetorical move to the author's address of Conceptual Man in Bikini Kill, Tumblr user Raquel writes a poem on her blog in response to the refrain, quote, "Did you hear," he says to me, "about Bill Cosby," end quote. Raquel's echoed repetition of "did I hear" over the course of the poem expresses a sort of disbelieving fury in response to the he who acts as though, for instance, the Cosby case is nothing more than a topic of casual conversation, rather than symptomatic of larger scale violence against girls and women. Raquel answers his question by narrativizing her own and her friend's experiences of trauma, writing that, quote, "The first time I had to hold a friend's hand through a hospital visit, I was 13, end quote. She here mirrors the collapse of individual and collective trauma seen in the example above, emphasizing the overall message of the poem. In the face of gendered trauma, girls often have no one but each other to depend on. Raquel makes this bond explicit moments later when she reveals that, quote, despite a taped confession, her abuser would get 15 months of community service, end quote. Both Raquel and her friend were failed by a justice system ostensibly put in place to protect them. The lack of access to proper care, combined with the misogyny inherent in this lack, is traumatic to them. Like in the example above, Raquel eventually addresses the man, quote, did I hear? Of course I did. I've been listening to screams echo around me, end quote. Raquel's weary, of course I did, is equally as disdainful as the Riot Girl's response. She is shaming the addressee for not listening to the screams. The frustration is palpable, but at the same time a secondary emotion to what seems in both this poem and the Bikini Kill poem to be the true purpose of the writing, to create and sustain community out of collective traumatic experience. For both subcultures, the DIY ethic is instrumental to providing girls their own unmediated space to express emotions and traumas otherwise unavailable to them. The handmade nature of zines involves an intimacy and indeed a form of care that transforms it from a mere piece of commercial media into a labor of love, which could not be reproduced within commercial publishing circles. The intimacy created by the zine's content is fortified by the handmade touches of a zine maker, allowing a connection to be made between the maker and the reader. The handwritten and handmade nature of zines enables a kind of material intimacy that blogs cannot emulate. However, by framing both zines and Tumblr poetry as primarily means for girls to create and sustain trauma cultures, as recourse to similar media practices emerging from similar needs despite their various material dissimilarities, affords us the ability to recognize the ways in which Tumblr poetry communities respond, consciously or unconsciously, to the lost materiality of the zine form. One of the most common responses to the loss of materiality on Tumblr is mimicry. Visual poetry and collage are two major genres of Tumblr poetry that girls generally engage in, using physical and digital art and images alongside their poetry to create a multifaceted expression of trauma. So though Riot Grrrl and Tumblr poetry place more value on different aspects of the DIY ethic, they share the same sense of urgency and the same purpose. Both utilize their medium as a method to respond to gendered trauma, to share experiences, and ultimately to heal. In the first issue of Riot Grrrl, the authors describe their impetus for the zine, quote, mainly due to the queasy feeling we girls get in our stomachs when we contemplate the general lack of girl power in society as a whole, end quote. In similar spirit, Raquel writes about how easy it is to make fun of the internet poets. She closes her poem with the lines, quote, I get a note from a young kid. Thank you for this. It helped me keep going. Okay then, this is why. This is purpose, end quote. Though they are separated by approximately 3 decades, the method is clear in both poems. The world may not feel like a safe place to be a girl, but through forms of DIY organization and collectivity, girls are able to create their own safe places. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for those papers. Is Zainab here? I'm just wondering if she's here. If not, we have some time for discussion. Okay, it seems as if Zainab isn't presenting, so we have approximately 10 minutes, 15 minutes for questions and discussion. So if anyone has any questions from the audience, please feel free to send it to me in the chat, and I would ask the panelists questions. I'll probably just start with one question for each of you. One theme coming out of the papers was that of agency, and or even another theme, resistance. So for Annie, I'm wondering, how do you see? So you're speaking about the gamer, making space, claiming space in this very toxic, masculine online culture. But I'm wondering how you see her performance of violence and these, stereotypes as perpetuating the same toxic culture that she's resisting. If you could just chat a bit more about that with us. And for Rachel, I'm wondering if you could just talk a bit more of, I really like that concept of collective witnessing among the zine girls. If you could talk a bit more about how this collective witnessing provides the space for healing and confronting the trauma, or even feeling the trauma that you speak about. So if you could start there. So any of you could jump in.
Okay, like, sorry, can you like repeat the last part of it? Like, I found those Zoom like really hard to follow because I've been a bit of hearing difficulties. Thank you.
Sorry. So yes, I'm wondering if you could just chat a bit more about how the performance of violence and these stereotypes in the virtual world and in her gaming, how these perpetuate the toxic cultures that she is also resisting.
Yeah, the problem with what is actually happening in gaming culture, and it's not all the time like that, but it's often in things that are very competitive, is the idea that there's this kind of hierarchy of people like being there, and you have some people that are actually pushed down. So to have someone at the top, you actually have things at the bottom, and there's a full system of what is a real game, what is not a real game. So for example, what is a real game is often like things are competitive, like mainstream AAA games, big budget games, and what is seen as being lower in a lot of community is things that are casual, like phone games, like Candy Crush, for example. So there's Jesper Juhl that actually look at those things and found like list of characteristics that we assign to like what are like real hardcore games and what are casual gaming, and systematically like casual games are gendered female, which is highly problematic because they're not just gendered female, but they're also like gendered, they're also put below because they need less skill, they're easier, and their teams, their stories are not complex, and often they're just like, they're not badly designed because they obviously make way more money than we would expect. But like the problem that they're very repetitive, and they're often like with a lot of pinks and I would say like almost kids imagery. So if you look at Candy Crush, you have like candies and stuff like that. It's really like juicy as a design, just puts them in the lower categories. So those things are like often in the background, and there's a lot of those things that are happening, and that this kind of like player interaction and a certain elite gang of player pushing back on certain games is actually like destroying the inclusivity that is possible in the culture. So I don't know like if it answers your whole thing, but it's one point where from which we can go.
Good. So Rachel, yeah, just tell us a bit more of that concept of collective witnessing, and you know the possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think one sort of big concept with this idea of collective witnessing that I touched on like a little bit, but the idea of second person address in these poems is one sort of cool rhetorical device that girls tend to use. The idea of they'll use you when they really mean themselves. And it's sort of one of those linguistic practices that's very useful, I guess, to creating an in-group. When they use you as in, you know, you are watching this or you are experiencing this, as in I am experiencing this, but also their reader is experiencing or witnessing this, they sort of create almost a third space. Instead of being, you know, us and them, it's somewhere in between that. And I think that's sort of the space where this healing from trauma can occur, because it's not necessarily divorcing themselves as the writer or the poet from the trauma. It's also not sort of alienating their audience from the trauma, if that makes sense. The second person, I think, that they use is a space of possibility for this healing. The downside of that, of course, being that when they say, you know, you experiencing that, meaning both themselves and their addressee, it erases a lot of very important differences. And that's something that gets taken up a lot in zine studies, the idea that both Riot Grrrl, especially Riot Grrrl, but also these like Tumblr poetry communities are very much imagined white, imagined heterosexual, imagined able-bodied. And so it does sort of, the idea of collective witnessing can also sort of exclude a lot of people or erase a lot of people. So it's something I think that needs a little bit more nuance, but yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. And we have a question for Annie from the audience. And so the person is wondering if you could speak a bit more about hegemonic transitivity. And you know, they're saying that your paper reminds them so much of the MMA culture. And the argument that the scholar Ronda Rousey makes, that you know, the MMA culture has equalized the UFC for women by who sell out arenas for their fights. So you know, they're wondering if there's an alternative to hegemonic transitivity for women to survive in such male-dominated spaces. So could you just chat a bit more about this concept of hegemonic transitivity?
First, Darlene, thank you for your question. Like, I think like I don't know much of MMA culture, so I'm probably going to look that up. The concept is like, I'm not super good at pronouncing English, so I apologize. But the concept is hegemonic transgressivity. So it's about transgressing barriers. So that's why like probably it was confusing, because I'm not the best at pronouncing those things. So the idea of that is there's, we had like for a long time this discourse that is coming from the art world where transgression is valued. So you have an art movement, and then you have the second one that builds on it but rejects it, and blah, blah, blah. So this kind of transgression is often seen as being at the edge, like the newest knowledge we have, and it's kind of valorized. And some people started to look at this, and at some point, like, we have this impression that transgression is linked to activism and all kind of positive things, but realize that transgression can also be a way to reinsert values that were already there. So in the case of video game culture, the industry really pushed on that a lot, reinforcing the idea that like, yeah, like gaming is a space of male and of edgy people and of teenagers. Like teenage culture is super important into that. So hegemonic transgressivity is that kind of transgressivity where like you feel like you're transgressing, but you're just like looking edgy instead of really questioning like norms that are happening. So yeah, like I feel like in terms of the women response to that, like they actually often, because of structural obstacles, like cannot get involved into gaming culture as much as men. So because often like they are the one with more responsibilities, or they're being encouraged on other kind of pastime that are less technologically based or stuff like that for like whatever reason. And those change a lot. So like what I'm saying there is dated a bit probably, but there's a lot of obstacle to like becoming proficient for women at gaming. So this is like pushing them away. So we still need to find a way to include them, and queer studies are actually doing like nice work of doing that. So if you want to see what can be done and like interrogate those things, so probably queer studies in queer game studies would be a nice place to start.
Okay. And we have another question from the audience for Rachel. And so the person is wondering if you have any thoughts about the relationship between Riot Grrrl and Tumblr, and the Tumblr poetry, and how this fits into broader discussions and ideas of feminist genealogy, generations, or waves, or even if it problematizes or challenges some of these concepts. Yeah.
Sorry. I think it's interesting that you ask about waves, as I think there's the argument to be made that Riot Grrrl sort of kicked off or is seen as kicking off third wave feminism. But yeah, I think that the connection does maybe challenge the idea of like waves of feminism, just in that I'm trying to think of new ways of that we can think about feminist ideas that kind of move away from just the linear time structure. So, you know, because I think that there's more of a connection between this 1990s movement and this 2020 movement than there is between, you know, Riot Grrrl and a lot of other things that were happening maybe in the 90s. I think that reading them together kind of challenges the idea that we're always making linear progress with our theories and with our ideas. And I think that my point more with linking them, more than feminist genealogy, was to move a little bit also beyond boundaries of sort of what we consider genre in literature. So the idea of this very material zine that you can hold and publish and distribute through mail, and this digital, you know, ephemera can in fact be sort of linked, moving away from, you know, like I said, these linear temporalities of just, you know, we had this and then now we're done with that and we move to this, and, you know, we continually make progress. I think there's something to be said for thinking about modes of resistance a little bit less linearly. That's a word.
Okay, great. So if we have no more questions, I'd like to propose that we end the panel and have a longer break so that we could get some time to stretch, refresh ourselves, and rejoin the conversation for the next panel. Okay, thank you very much for your really exciting papers.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone. Thank you, Rachel, too. It was super great.
Thank you, both of our presenters, and thank you, Nikolai, for chairing the session. We'll have a bit longer break this time, and we'll be back at 1:40 for the last panel of the day.